Hello and welcome into Loftside Banter for the next NFL preview this fine day, if you will. We'll be talking about the AFC South. Now, the AFC South is interesting because it's probably one of the easier ones to predict. And it's because one team has kind of had to go through some of these steps that most of the teams in the division are going through a couple years ago. So the AFC South obviously has the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans had the number one overall pick. That should tell you kind of where they were. Jacksonville Jaguars are kind of in that whole mess almost all the time, even though they've done these steps to build their team quite a few years ago. Nothing has seemed to stick with them. And it's weird because they seem to be in one of those modes that they could move as a franchise. They could stay put. They have a top-end quarterback, at least allegedly. They have weapons, but it just nothing seems to stick. So they're kind of in this limbo area. But that's neither here nor there, right? We'll get into all that. Indianapolis is an interesting one. They've been kind of in limbo since Andrew Luck has left. And it's one of those tough situations. And again, we'll get into all that. And then the Houston Texans are the team that have done all of these things. They have a quarterback. They have weapons. They have a defense. They have a coach that everyone seems to like. So, Houston Texans, first up, they were 10-7 last year. They won the AFC South pretty handily, but it wasn't clean. They struggled against just about everybody. CJ Stroud, their quarterback, went through that sophomore slump. And we could tell going into the playoffs they were probably in trouble. And they did. They were in trouble. The O-line was a mess last year. They had probably statistically one of the worst offensive linemen as far as a guard or tackle was concerned. And then they had issues with injuries last year. Nico Collins, Tank Dell missed time. Stephon Diggs missed. All three of them combined missed 17 games. So, you were relying on 2, 3s, and 4s to get you through as far as your weapons. So we got to see what happens with them. They've obviously moved on from some wide receivers and stuff like that. Guys they brought in, Nick Chubb, not quite the same Nick Chubb, but still a good running back to help Joe Mixon in that backfield. Braxton Berrios comes in from Miami. And over the last 10 years, I think Braxton Berrios has the most fantasy points from a drafted Patriots wide receiver, and he didn't play on the Patriots, I think, ever. At least not in a meaningful game. Christian Kirk is the other wide receiver that's coming in a little bit younger from that Jacksonville team. Again, not a top-end wide receiver, but a guy that knows how to produce, if need be, can kind of go off for one of those games. Trent Brown, Cam Robinson are the two new offensive tackles for this offensive line. EJ Speed, linebacker, CJ Gardner-Johnson. And then the interesting move was they said, let's just get younger all together in the wide receiving room. And they went after both Iowa State products, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. I really like that move. And those were second and third round picks. They were guys that were considered fringe first round selections at one point. Bring in guys that are familiar with each other. Case Keenum gone. Stephon Diggs, obviously a Patriot. Robert Woods is gone. Laramie Tunsil is gone. So, they've cleaned out. And then the other one was Kendrick Green, who I liked coming out of college and then just did not play well last year. He was statistically the worst guard, I think, in the league. So, they've had to fix those trenches spots, and they had to get a little bit younger in the wide receiving room, which they both did. The question is CJ Stroud going to bounce back? I believe he is, because I think he's way too talented to not have a great NFL career. I think it was a sophomore slump. And you chalk it up to different things throughout watching sports and stuff like that. You see the immense talent he had in what he was pulling off his rookie year, and then all of a sudden he's not that his second year. So The worry is that he showed kind of more who he is now that teams kind of know and how to scout him and how to, run a defense against him. But I think he's far too talented. I think he can adjust. I think he can do all those different things. This running back, tandem of Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb is the next question. Is Nick Chubb the guy that kind of really take some role from Joe Mixon? Because it's difficult to run that much, especially being older, especially having been in the league for a little bit. I'm scrolling really quick to see who else. They have British Brooks, who's a second-year guy, Jawar Jordan, Woody Marks comes in as a rookie out of USC. Damian Pierce is on this roster still. J.J. Taylor is still on this roster. So, the question is, outside of those two, who do you really have? Who's your third guy? Who's your third down back? Who's going to split the time? Is there going to be injury issues? We remember Nick Chubb went through a horrific injury a few years ago, and he's not the same burst of speed guy. So I think he fits the third down role really well. Hey, I need a few yards from him. He's a big body. Let's see what he can do. Can he add to this running back room, or is he going to be an injury problem? And now you're down to Joe Mixon running 20 times a game, 25 times a game, and there's no real break for him. The New York. I'm struggling this morning. Maybe be a goldfish. You know what I'm saying? New look offensive line. How are they going to gel together? How are they going to be better? C.J. Stroud cannot spend most of his time running around like he did. That's a problem. Injuries. We talk about them a lot, especially on Loftside Banter, and how it's not an excuse for me. I think teams need to take into consideration that players are going to go down. It is going to happen. And at some point in time, you need to build a roster that way. You need to develop. You need to have young guys step in and know what they're doing. How are injuries going to affect a team that has the talent like the Houston Texans? I'm thinking they're going to win the division. I don't think that's a question. Unless some miracle happens, I just don't foresee another team coming out and winning. I think the Houston Texans win the AFC South. They go to the playoffs. I think they're probably the only playoff team that comes out of this division. I don't foresee another team really competing that much. They're all in various stages of rebuilding or retooling or whatever you want to call it. I think this team's probably 10-7 again. I think that's the high end for them is 10-7. Maybe one more game at 11. It depends on C.J. Stroud. Depends on the injuries. Depends on the offensive line. It depends on a lot of different factors. So there are still questions for the Texans. I just think they're easily in that first spot. Next, Indianapolis Colts, who went 8-9 last year, did not make the playoffs. Richardson struggled all year. He can throw the deep ball, but he can't make a touch pass to save his life. And he's been up here a couple of years. Now, here's the caveat for Anthony Richardson. Most of the rookies that came out this year, quarterback-wise, are older than him. He was super young coming into the league. Super, super raw talent. People could see it. Now, people could see it in college, where the talent isn't as good. He's come out. He's struggled. I even thought he was a starter at one point, so I put him on my fantasy team. That was a mistake. They brought in Daniel Jones, who was just named Week 1 starter. And obviously, Anthony Richardson and his team are not happy with any of that. But he's still super young. Give him some time to learn some stuff. Give him some time to work behind Daniel Jones. And I don't think Daniel Jones is as bad as what everybody says he is. He was on bad New York Giants teams. Really bad. He got the contract extension over Saquon Barkley. At some point, he had to have shown something somewhere to somebody. Well, he's on a 1-year, $14 million deal with the Indianapolis Colts. He's going to start Week 1. And I think this team probably has some better outcomes than it did last year. I mean, 8-9 last year. I mean, you were relying on Joe Flacco. You were relying on Anthony Richardson. And Joe Flacco's no longer in town. He's the starter in Cleveland now. Interesting. The offensive line struggled, obviously, mightily, which surprised me because they have some dogs on that offensive line. They've had to retool it with Will Freeze going to the Vikings and Ryan Kelly going to the Vikings, actually. It's the team allowed the 7th most sacks last year. And again, I thought they had a pretty good offensive line. They were pretty good at building offensive lines in Indianapolis. So it is what it is, but the defense also finished 24th in the league, which is not great. So if you can't stop anybody and you can't protect your quarterback no matter who it is, you were going to struggle. And they went 8-9. So there's a realistic possibility that they challenge at least a little bit. But I think they're probably going backwards a little bit. Maybe a little. As we mentioned, Daniel Jones came in from the Giants. Khalil Herbert's here. Javarius Ward, cornerback, is in. Tyler Warren was their first-round pick at 14. I really like Tyler Warren. Penn State product. Justin Wally, a really, really good cornerback. I think will develop into a really good corner. DJ Giddens from Kansas State was their 5th-round pick, a new running back. And Jalen Travis on Iowa State. He was actually a 4th-round pick. I wrote it out of order, apparently, and can't seem to notice that I wanted to switch them. But again, we digress. Joe Flacco back with the Browns, starter with the Browns. Justin Blackmon goes to the Saints, and the kicker Matt Gay went to the Commanders. I had questions here of who was going to win the quarterback battle. We already know that. It's Daniel Jones. Veteran. I think he just needs to be in the right situation. He obviously went to Minnesota last year for a little bit, worked under that system. Maybe he's a better quarterback for it. Maybe. I mean, we saw Sam Darnold be a better quarterback in Minnesota. It's J.J. McCarthy seems to look pretty good in that system. Maybe learning a little bit that way. Maybe having somebody there to really kind of help you develop. I just don't think he ever had that time in New York. There were a lot of expectations for him going right into that. Those are going to be the questions for him. I think this is a move that also helps keep the coach a little bit out of hot water because, hey, the normal the normal thing is to have a veteran start. And not to say that Anthony Richardson is not a veteran at this point. He is. But at some point in time, if you can't make a touch pass, if you can't complete more than, 7 passes in a game, and of course, 2 or 3 of them are going to be bombs to somebody, great. But if you can't consistently stay on the field and get through third downs and everything else like that, your team is not going to move the football. You can't rely on just throwing it as far as you can. I mean, there were talks from other podcasts and stuff like that, and I don't see a problem with it other than the fact that you can't do this. They'll just key on it. If Anthony Richardson went to the Dolphins and you could just throw to Tyreek Hill all the time, just, hey, you outrun everybody, we'll throw it as far as we can, and then you just go get it. Seems like it'll work all the time. They're just going to put people back there and just wait for you. But, I mean, that's kind of where he's at. I mean, he is a Hail Mary throwing quarterback right now. That's it. He doesn't have any other real ability. And it's sad because he came into this league so young. He came in with not a lot of football under his belt, and he was thrusted into a starting role that it just didn't work out. It hasn't worked out. There's mistakes from this team, a lot of them, obviously, with the offensive line, defense not being able to start everybody. Are those fixed? Are they not? That's the big question. And then also Jim Irsay passed away this offseason. Will the team operate differently? Carly Irsay Gordon is the new CEO. So his daughter, one of his daughters, it's kind of an ownership by committee with his kids. There's I believe 3 of them. But Carly Irsay Gordon said the right things in the offseason of why she wears headsets up in the booth or up in her box and stuff like that. She wants to know what's being called. She wants to know who to blame if things go wrong. She wants to know. She wants answers. And not that Jim didn't. Jim Irsay was a weird figure. He would get in trouble. He would admit he would get in trouble. He would apologize for it. And then he would get in trouble again. And he would do the whole same thing. But he at least owned his mistakes. He was a real person. He didn't try to hide behind things. He knew that he screwed up in different off-field agendas that he had. But Jim Irsay was a good owner of a football team, especially for a team that didn't put a ton together before him. He obviously won a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning and Tony Dungy as his coach. He had Andrew Luck. He made correct moves with people in place. They haven't been so far, probably in the last 10 years. I believe they haven't won a division title in 10 years, which is crazy to me. But this team has struggled since Andrew Luck left. They haven't been able to find a quarterback. I believe they're on their 10 to 12th quarterback or something like that. I mean, they had Carson Wentz at one point. They had Jacoby Brissett at one point. Matt Ryan at one point. I mean, this team went through a whole bunch of different people. So we're trying to find that quarterback and fix these mistakes. They're probably a 7-win team. If Daniel Jones can be the quarterback that he was drafted to be, I think you have a contending shot, very small, a contending shot. I think you're probably finishing second in this division. And I don't think you're making the playoffs still. They have a weak schedule, quote unquote. We're going to see what and how they develop some of these younger guys. And I'm not talking about Richardson anymore. At this point, I don't think Richardson, at least where I'm sitting right now, doesn't play. But there's one other team that really kind of competes for this number 2 spot in this division, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Jacksonville was one of the teams that went through this process, got Trevor Lawrence, got some guys that they can throw the ball to, Brian Thomas from last year. They've picked up players. They've had an okay offensive line. Their defense could do different things. But at some point in time, all this falls apart. And injuries to Trevor Lawrence is one of them. But he actually hasn't been a top echelon quarterback that a number 1 overall pick is. And first year coaching was obviously that was a disaster every year. And then Doug Peterson really didn't do a whole lot to improve this team coaching wise. 4-13, no playoffs last year. They fired Doug Peterson finally after the year, and they named Liam Cohen, who was the offensive coordinator for the Bucs, who really brought back Baker Mayfield to an upper echelon quarterback. They had 10 one-score losses last year. 10. And if you can do your math, and those are all reversed, they're 14-3. I'm not saying that that's a positive to look at it, because obviously they didn't win. They don't do those things to win. That's why they're in the position they were in. I think that they're probably number 2, number 3. They and the Colts are gonna flip flop. I think they may have a better advantage simply because they've had these things in place, and if they're healthy, and we're talking about health now, if they can stay healthy, they're number 2. And if they don't get healthy, they're number 3. Yeah, well, that's what happens in the NFL. Sorry, not sorry. Trevor Lawrence missed 7 games last year. Mac Jones was the backup. That should tell you everything you need to know. But Mac Jones and Trevor Lawrence had similar numbers going into last year as far as starters, which is not great because Mac Jones has not looked good in almost any capacity, whereas Trevor Lawrence has shown flashes of his brilliance and everything else like that. Now it's Nick Mullins, probably the backup. He came in from the Vikings. De'Ami Brown was a career year last year for the Commanders, comes in to help the wide receiving corps. Robert Hansley, Bucks. He started 35 games in the NFL. Jordan Lewis, cornerback from the Cowboys, is 64 starts over 9 years. So again, some veteran leadership in that cornerback position. They traded up to get Travis Hunter, who is a weapon, whether offense or defense. He was the second overall pick. They traded up to get him from 4, I believe it was. And they gave up quite a bit. And they're thinking that he's going to be the weapon that is needed to help this team, probably more wide receiver. And then Wyatt Millam, a guard from West Virginia. He was also a fringe first-round draft pick, ended up going in the 3rd round. A lot of teams said that he would move over to tackle at some point in his career. Mac Jones is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. Christian Kirk went over to the Texans. Evan Ingram is gone. He's a Bronco now. And then some other older veterans. Andrew Sisko, a safety who went over to the Jets, clearing out some cap to get some younger guys in. I think this team probably has 7 wins in them this year. You know, playing teams like the Broncos in week 16, the Chargers in week 11. They go and play over in London like they do every year against the Rams. They play the Chiefs on Monday night. They play the 49ers this year. So they play some tough games. Just teams that I think are further along than them. And are they ever going to get to that point? We don't know. You know, how will Travis Hunter be used this year? Will he be mainly offense? I think that's probably the answer. But I also think that he's going to see some time at corner. Liam Cohen, does he know what it takes to lead a team? He's a younger head coach. Now, we've seen younger head coaches do really well. It's not my cup of tea. I want a guy that has experience, but that doesn't always work out. Is he going to get over his Duval moment? Which I think he already has, but it was funny for like a week where everybody was just making fun of him. I'm sure that I have TikTok save of him making that stupid sound bite, if you will. But I think he's the best fit for Trevor Lawrence. The way he's developed quarterbacks, the way he's reestablished them, the way he's done all those things, I think he's the best fit for Trevor Lawrence. So that makes sense to me. Can he stay healthy? Can Trevor Lawrence stay healthy? It's a huge ask because I don't think he really has. And when he hasn't had a good team around him. And then the running back room. Who's number one? Who's going to be the number one running back? Is it Travis Etienne? Tank Bigsby? Which guy is it? Is it going to be a split? Is that how they're going to run the football? Is with 2 different guys? I generally think when you look at quarterbacks, and quarterbacks are kind of like goalies or goaltenders in hockey. If you have 2, you don't have 1. They obviously have a number 1 quarterback. Do running backs fit in the same profile, do you think? If you have 2, you don't really have 1? Because I don't think so. I think if you have 2, you can split some time, you keep guys healthy. Running the football is a tough ask, you know? So, is there the playoffs? Can they win a few more games? You know, I think they have to go out and beat the Titans twice. I think they have the ability to beat the Colts twice. I don't think they're going to beat the Texans twice. I think they have the ability to beat them once. I don't think we're talking about such a huge gap that they can't do it. But they have to beat teams like the Panthers. They have to beat teams like the Seahawks. They have to beat the Raiders, the Titans twice, the Colts twice, the Jets. Those teams on their schedule, they need to beat. And then there's a possibility that they're there. So I think that they probably finish second. And again, it's going to come down to them or the Colts. Those are the 2. I think they can flip-flop. So the Tennessee Titans are next. And the Tennessee Titans were 3-14. No playoffs. They were in the season with Will Levis as their quarterback, who made so many bad mistakes last year. So many bad mistakes that he's not the guy. You just know. Brian Callahan, the head coach, offensive guy, could make it work with Will Levis, could make it work with Mason Rudolph. Not, again, that's a surprise to really anybody. But they go out and they draft Cam Ward number 1 overall. Not the greatest depth as far as quarterbacks were concerned in this draft. Cam Ward was the most talented guy. He won the Heisman Trophy, drafted number 1. He's proved it at Washington State. He's proved it at a smaller school. He proved it at Miami. So I think he's as good as they were going to get last year. And I think if it were a different team in that pick, I think Travis Hunter's going number 1. I think the Tennessee Titans needed a quarterback that badly that they skipped over what I think was the best athlete and the best prospect in the draft because they needed something of more value. And it makes sense. Offensive line trouble last year. They bring in Dan Moore. They bring in Kevin Zeitler. They bring in guys like Tyler Lockett, longtime Seahawks wide receiver, 1-year deal. Van Jefferson, who had flashes in Los Angeles for the Rams. Their backups are more proven, I guess. Brandon Allen, again, I say proven, a very loose term. Tim Boyle, again. Yeah. They bring in guys like that. Joey Sly is now your kicker. So, I mean, they bring in guys, a lot of them on 1-year deals. I mean, Dan Moore came in on a 4-year deal. Cody Barton actually came in on a 3-year deal, but he's an outside linebacker who played for Denver last year. And, you know, I think they're bridging most of it. I don't think that's a stretch to say. I think they're bridging. They have a few guys that are in. Even Kevin Zeitler came in on a 1-year deal, $9 million. So, I mean, their offensive line isn't going to be perfect. Their wide receivers aren't going to be perfect. But they're bringing in guys that can get off the books quickly. Hey, you're going to probably have another high draft pick. And now from here, you're going to draft some more players that fit. And whether it's Brian Callahan, whether they move to someone else, I don't know. Most of their re-signings, almost all of them, Sebastian Joseph Day, defensive tackle, Morgan Cox, their long snapper, James Lynch, defensive tackle, Darrell Baker, their cornerback. All the guys they brought back for re-signings are 1-year deals. All right, we know what you can provide. We know the depth that you're going to give. Let's see what you can do on this 1 year, and then we'll go from there. It's going to be roster turnover again next year. Some notable losses, Chidobe Awuzie, one of their cornerbacks, Tyler Boyd, wide receiver. Jack Gibbons obviously went to the Patriots. Harold Landry obviously over to the Patriots. Mason Rudolph is back in Pittsburgh to be the backup. Nick Vanek, their tight end, and then Nick Westbrook Ikin. I'm going to always struggle with names. But he's gone. He was, your number 2, really. Those are the guys that, under Mike Vrabel, they were doing really well. Obviously, Mike Vrabel brought in a bunch of them. But draft-wise, like I said, Cam Ward, number 1 overall. Well, they went to players like Shamir Dyke, a wide receiver out of Florida in the 4th round, which I didn't like. He was a home run hitting wide receiver, and that was about it. But then in the late 4th, they got Gunnar Helm, tight end out of Texas. I love that. Alec Ayomanor from Stanford, who I liked better than Dyke. I think he's going to have a great career in Tennessee because I think he's probably one of the more talented ones. If he can just develop, I think he'll be fine. So those are the kind of players that they brought in. And again, they just, I'm not seeing a ton of talent come out of past Cam Ward and Ayomanor and Helm. I don't think there's a ton there. I think they kind of stretched on a lot of these picks. But we know where they are. They're at the end of the division. Right? They're in the back end. But a lot of these things, a ton of movement in the front office. They ended up going with 16 undrafted free agents this year. They brought in guys like John Fassel, who's a special teams guru and has been for a long time in this league. So maybe they don't make mistakes on special teams. Maybe they don't do any of those things. But I mean, these teams are all not separated by a lot. I think top to bottom, I think the Texans to the Titans, we're talking about a huge gap. The 2 in the middle are going to flip-flop here or there. They ended up getting rid of Treylon Burks, another wide receiver who just didn't develop after they traded A.J. Brown, a move that Mike Vrabel didn't want to have happen. So, this team clearly has issues. They'll have issues. They're on a rebuild. I like Brian Callahan. I do as a head coach. He just needs to be able to develop the guys he wants to instead of coming into Mike Vrabel type players. Because I think we all agree that Mike Vrabel was probably fired from Tennessee a little early. And again, as a Patriots fan, I'm okay with that. But it's tough to walk in when you have a certain development and a certain style from a defensive kind of a head coach to then an offensive coach. And you go from Ryan Tannehill to Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. So we know where they're going to be. They're going to be last. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be 4 wins for them. I think they maybe improve by maybe a game. And, I've seen some experts give them as many as 7. I think Cam Ward's going to struggle early. So be prepared for that in Tennessee. I think he's going to struggle early. I mean, they play the Broncos, the Rams, the Colts, the Texans, and the Cardinals the first 5 weeks. I see 1 win out of that. Maybe the Cardinals, maybe the Colts. I think they lose every other game. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think it's the Texans. I'm going to go with the Jaguars second. I know I said with the Colts right at that. I think Daniel Jones is going to be better. I think they're going to be a game apart, maybe. So I'll go Jaguars second. Health, the big one there. Daniel Jones is the factor for the Colts in third. And then the Tennessee Titans are fourth. But that is the AFC South. Next, we will be doing the AFC West. Hopefully will be coming out. And again, these will all be out right by the time the opener comes out. And I know I have all the NFC still to go. And we'll get you there. So Texans, Jaguars, Colts, Titans. That's your AFC South. After that, we'll see you for the next one.